If you've been a fan of this channel for any stretch of time, you know that Naughty Dog is one of my favorite developers in all of gaming. I devoted a lot of time over the last few years breaking down the Jak and Daxter, Uncharted, and The Last of Us games and why they mean as much to me as they do. I actually did devote some time many years ago to their breakout PlayStation hit, Crash Bandicoot, but that was 6 years ago, and those videos were really short and also co-reviews of the Spyro games and a video project that ultimately didn't pan out how I'd have hoped. So I thought now was a good time to go back and close the book on my going in depth on Naughty Dog's games and the history of these games by talking about their run of Crash Bandicoot games in the PlayStation 1. But to tell the story of Crash Bandicoot, we have to tell the story of Naughty Dog, particularly the men who created it, Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin. How they went from schoolboys who liked programming to creating the original mascot of Sony's PlayStation, arguably being one of the biggest titles to put that console on the map. Their company went on to be one of the most prolific first-party PlayStation studios as their games defined every PlayStation console they touched. It's quite an interesting story. There's a lot you could say, but since Crash is the point, I'll try to condense the early history into the next few minutes as best I can. From their own words, Andy and Jason met in Hebrew school in the early 80s. Both had Apple II computers, which was one of the first consumer-ready personal computers. On it, they liked playing games but also liked making them. In IGN's History of Naughty Dog article, Andy Gavin claims that he liked coding and his stuff was pretty good by the standards of a 12-year-old in the 80s. But his games didn't have a lot of artistic appeal. Jason Rubin, on the other hand, had games that didn't run very well but looked considerably more appealing since Jason was a good artist. You can naturally see why these two would find their skill sets complementary. And there was enormous potential here because, as they aptly pointed out, being good at computers and understanding them and troubleshooting them, especially as a kid, was a very valuable skill in the mid-1980s because most people didn't have that knowledge. And most people definitely didn't have the interest to figure that stuff out. Since this was a world before you could just Google everything. They toiled away on a perfect copy of Nintendo's Punch-Out, but before they could even get in trouble for the blatant copyright infringement, they overwrote the only copy they had in the files, and thus the game was dead. Their first actual game was called Math Jam for the Apple II. Their company was Jam Software, which stood for Jason and Andy's Magic. Sort of. Originally, there was another guy they worked with named Mike, but they bought out his shares for $100 and changed it from Jason, Andy, Mike to Jason and Andy's Magic. Math Jam ran into an issue where you need a lot of bureaucracy to actually get a school to buy a game for their computer library, so education was out for these self-publishing 15-year-old boys as they gave it away for free and switched to making general games. The crazy thing about Math Jam is that it is the first ever technically finished game from the company that would later become Naughty Dog, but the game is actually lost media. We know it exists, and there are pictures of what the packaging looked like, and by packaging I mean instructions and a disc put inside of a Ziploc bag, but no footage of the game exists, and to this day, no copy of it has ever emerged. From what I gather, it's just a math game, so I doubt we're missing that much with it, but it is insane to think that in the grand scheme of gaming history, this is a significant title. But nobody will ever see it, I assume. But as I said, they switched to non-educational games afterwards. So that's how you get Ski Crazed, which came out in 1986 for the Apple II. This game is also nothing special by the standards of today's games, but that's not what makes it impressive. Again, Andy and Jason are still teenagers at this point, and they have this fully finished skiing game. And it was even published by an actual publisher, Vaudeville. So they were making moves upwards with each title. Vaudeville also published their next game, 1988's Dream Zone for the Apple II and other devices like the Atari ST and the Amiga. Looking at footage of this game, it was not at all what I expected. It's a point-and-click adventure-style game where you interact with a real-world setting where you enter a dream world via the toilet. Having real photos like this in a game was somewhat advanced for its time, but I didn't know much about this game beyond it existing before watching it today. Dream Zone sold decently well for the standards of its time, but Andy and Jason felt like they were destined for more because Vaudeville wasn't the best at the distribution of games. So the duo straight up cold-called Electronic Arts in the late 80s, a big publisher who was surprisingly interested in working with Jam Software and had them send them a copy of Dream Zone. They liked what they saw and got to work with the duo on their next game, where things really started to change. During the development of the next title, Jam Software was renamed to Naughty Dog. Their first published work with the new name was an RPG for the Apple II, Amiga, and PC called Keef the Thief, which debuted in 1989. This is a step up from Dream Zone in production value, but you can look at Keef the Thief and see how it was iterating upon the menu system from Dream Zone to create something significantly more advanced. Keef the Thief ended up having a budget of about $50,000, which today would amount to about $140,000. At the time, that was still pretty small for game development, but the game also made back its money too because it sold decently well. In hindsight, Andy and Jason reflected that they thought the game was good, but its main issue is that they could already feel a lack of control inside the publisher's system. EA wanted the game to have a comedy angle and gave them a comedy writer to do it. They thought it was funny, but not something that people in the audience really wanted. EA then telling them after the fact that maybe comedy wasn't a great angle. Either way, they didn't have the power to do anything about it. In the 90s, Naughty Dog got into the console business with their next game published by EA, Rings of Power for the Sega Genesis that came out in 1991. The guys were in college at this point and had to make the game by exchanging info over the modem internet. Doing that and making their first console game was a huge challenge, but the game fully sold out, selling over 100,000 copies. However, EA was no longer interested in working with them after this because they had gotten the license to start making the Madden games, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you that there was a treasure trove of cash that Naughty Dog and more copies of Rings of Power were never going to provide. Because of that hit, Naughty Dog took time off and focused on school as Jason moved to LA while Andy was in Boston, until the creator of the 3DO, who worked with them back at EA, sent them a dev kit and they were intrigued. The 3DO was a CD-based console in the mid-90s that had the ability to render 3D graphics, which Jason Rubin started to learn about in his time in California. CDs would change the game in many ways, giving the ability to put more into their games and making them more ambitious, also having more storage space than cartridges. CDs were also significantly easier to manufacture compared to cartridges. The cost of printing carts was, as I just said, the thing that ended ND's relationship with EA, but they began developing their 3DO game on their own dime, which nearly cost everything they had. When thinking about what the game should be, they looked towards what was popular, a trend that will be relevant as you go through the company's gameography. Back in the mid-90s, one of the most notable titles was Mortal Kombat, a fighting game that captured mainstream attention in a way that similar games like Street Fighter didn't because of how violent and graphic the game was for the standards of its time. This isn't about MK, but that is what MK was most known for and why it was so popular, and that popularity is why it inspired Naughty Dog on what they were going to do with their next game, Way of the Warrior. Unrelated, but it's really nice that they can laugh at Way of the Warrior because I played this fucking game. It is trash. Like, look at this cutscene.
For the last time, warriors have convened from all over the planet for this, the last competition. Welcome, noble challenger. Prepare to find the way.
And then when I was playing the game, I was just mashing buttons and I was getting my butt royally kicked. But it was pretty funny though, I was cackling. Despite this crude final product, this game was what set everything we know about the studio today in motion. It was the first time they had to reach outside their company and contract other teams to help them with the game and its animations. Other people besides them had worked on some of their other games, but not quite as big as this project. The game is significant in Naughty Dog's history, not because the game was especially awesome or a huge success, but because of the technical prowess of the people who made it. A fact I'm sure most know or could deduce, the 3DO did not become a household name. But after Way of the Warrior, Naughty Dog had a choice to make. There was a bidding war on who was going to own Way of the Warrior. Funding the game themselves, like I said, cost Andy and Jason almost everything they had. The 3DO company wanted to buy and own the game and have the developers go exclusive with them, but that probably would have spelled the end of the company as we know it because the console wasn't a success. Crystal Dynamics also wanted what Naughty Dog had on offer, but Andy and Jason thought about half the company wanted the game and the other half just wanted the tech used to develop the combat so they could work it into other games. But then, there was Universal Studios who wanted to publish Naughty Dog games for the next few games, and that was the choice they went with. Which finally brings us to the game we're talking about today. I decided to focus so much on explaining the company's origin because, in hindsight, I felt like my videos on Jak, Uncharted, and The Last of Us more or less became a documentary about Naughty Dog, so I might as well use the Crash 1 video as a chance to explore their early history too. Anyway, Universal had a 3-game deal with Naughty Dog and they had the creative control to do whatever they wanted with their $2 million budget. They did exactly what they did for Way of the Warrior, look at the landscape of games and think about what niche they can fill. Back in the mid-90s, there were many electronic companies manufacturing game consoles and a lot failed. But one company was set to make a splash. Sony with the upcoming release of their PlayStation in 1995. Naughty Dog was going to make their game on Sony's console and were set on it being a 3D character action game. Because the PS1 had many iconic games in its first year, but what the console didn't have was its own mascot platformer. Nintendo had Mario and Sega had Sonic the Hedgehog, so they thought the perfect idea would be giving Sony their mascot platformer, which is how the development of this game got going. When it started, Andy and Jason hired more people and really grew their company in size. The character design process was long and involved many different departments at Universal and Sony, and I'll get into that in a few minutes, but for right now, the important thing is this. A lot of time and talent went into conceptualizing this original character and series, Crash Bandicoot. Sony knew that their competition, Nintendo, with their Nintendo 64 console, was about to completely shatter the gaming industry with their incredibly innovative Super Mario 64. So, Sony took a look at Naughty Dog's game and were like, alright, this is our Mario 64 killer, and made it the big attraction at the PlayStation side of the Electronic Entertainment Expo of 1996, to specifically compete with Mario 64. And that is the story of how Crash Bandicoot came to be and how Naughty Dog began its long-standing relationship with PlayStation that was cemented in the fall of 1996 when Crash Bandicoot released worldwide on the PlayStation. My videos usually have a story synopsis at the beginning so you can grasp the context of the game I'm discussing, but in the case of Crash Bandicoot, there really isn't much of that to go around. It's no different than the original Mario or Sonic. If you press start, you just get dumped into the game with no context, but if you hold on the title screen, you get a brief cutscene where an evil scientist named Dr. Neo Cortex and his assistant, Dr. Embryo, are experimenting with animals in a thing called the Cortex Vortex to create some kind of army. The Bandicoot has been a consistent failure until he escapes and jumps out the window and washes up on shore 3 islands away. However, Crash's girlfriend Tana was next in line for the experiment, so Crash needs to work his way back. And that is genuinely it. Though if you read the manual, it is slightly different. According to this, Cortex was making an army, but Crash was deemed unworthy of it because of repeat trial failures and was ejected from the island, and now Crash must work his way back to save Tana. That's not how it happened in the game, so maybe the manual was just written at an earlier point in development. Or perhaps whoever wrote it just forgot and thought that it didn't really matter because the game has virtually no story anyway. You wash up on Insanity Island, and Insanity Beach is the first level of the game. As one might expect of a very early 3D platformer from 30 years ago, Crash Bandicoot is a pretty simple game. In fact, I'm not sure this gameplay analysis is even going to last that long. That is of course not an issue, but a feature. The game was designed around the console and the controller it was on. In Crash, you play entirely linear levels where the goal is to get from one side of the level to the other. In that way, it's no different than Super Mario Bros., despite the changed camera perspective and the Z-axis that goes along with it. Crash can move in multiple directions, but the level design is still point A to point B platforming, not open free roam. This was a wise choice, because like Jason Rubin said on a Dev Plays episode, there wasn't a rulebook on how to make a good 3D platformer, so they took the game design principles that were well established in the previous generation and just turned the camera around. Hence why the original code name for this was the Sonic's Ass Game, because you'd be looking at the character's backside for most of it. So the game is visually stunning for 1986 because it was one of the early 3D platformers, but it's not doing anything to break the bank in terms of level design, which is again, a strength. The PlayStation controller used a 4-button D-pad for character movement, so various games would come up with unique ways to control the character that would feel natural in a 3-dimensional space while not having a 360-degree stick. That's what made the Nintendo 64 and Mario 64 so revolutionary. It was the controller that would allow for free-roaming 3D gameplay. Naughty Dog wisely knew that the controller was 4-directional, so it would then be wise to not require the player to run around in a big open space, instead making levels that were mostly hallways perfectly suited for the controller it was using. The simplicity makes the game very easy to pick up and play. A thing I feel most modern games, even 3D platformers, don't have as much anymore, just the ability for anyone of any skill level to just grab the controller and grasp how to play within a minute or two. In this, Crash runs, he jumps with X and can use that to kill enemies, and he spins with the square button, which also kills enemies, and can be used to crash into boxes and break them. They have fruit inside which get you an extra life if you have 100 of them, or some other power-up like an extra life or a Witch Doctor mask, also known as Aku Aku. If you have one of these, you can take a hit and not die. If you have 2, you can have 2. If you have 3, you get short-term invincibility. But as far as the core gameplay mechanics are concerned, that's the entire game. Like I said, it's very easy to pick up and play. The first island demonstrates all the ways the game uses the simple controls in a variety of situations. Insanity Beach is where you learn how to play. Jungle Rollers and Rolling Stones show off the kind of timing-based platforming that Crash is all about. The Great Gate and Native Fortress show how some of these levels will have 2D elements, and the enemies and obstacles will be designed around that. Boulders flips the camera perspective and makes you adapt to that, and Hog Wild is an auto-running animal segment where you need to time your actions really carefully or else you die. And the boss fight, Papu Papu, well, this shows you that the boss fights in this game are easy as hell. Though I find the entire game pretty easy nowadays. I was not saying that 20 years ago, so I'm not inherently saying the game is easy, just that I was not having a hard time with it at all. I had an almost fully maxed out life count before Island 2 was even over, and I had 2 Aku Akus for most of the early levels. If you hold on to those, you'll be invincible every time you get a new one and can blitz through the early sections. That's not to say I never died or anything. I lost my Aku Aku streak in Upstream, I think, but still, being in the 90s of the life count was where I stayed for most of the late game. But to reiterate, the game is certainly difficult if you've never played it before. I mean, I only started finding this game consistently simple and easy as an adult. As a kid, I thought it was hard as hell. And watching the dev plays video was something, because clearly the person off screen who's playing was struggling quite a lot with Hog Wild and never actually beat it during the entire 30-minute thing. And I remember when I was a kid playing this game with a babysitter who had played it when it was new when she was a kid, and we were handing the controller back and forth, dying left and right. But what I think is really satisfying about this game is how at no point is anything unreasonable being asked of you, whether it's Hog Wild or Sunset Vista or The Road to Nowhere or Native Fortress. Crash is a simple game, and so what's asked of you is also simple. But what comes with practice is getting a really good feel for the timing of the obstacles and understanding enemy patterns. That's the best kind of player death in a video game. The one where you feel like you know why you died and have an idea on what you're going to do next time to improve. When you've got the whole game in a flow state, it becomes really satisfying to quickly replay. If I'm doing an any percent run of Crash 1, I can beat the game in about 90 minutes. Not world record time, but something I can quickly pop in and play all the way through and have a decent time with. The second island, Wampa Island, introduces some new level types, like The Road to Nowhere, which is a rickety bridge against a bottomless pit. The Lost City, which is another 2D stage inside of a temple with numerous obstacles like retracting platforms, spinning platforms over fire, and a timing challenge where 2 bats will be placed on either side of a platforming section. And then a swarm of bats will fly from one to the other. To make them stop, you need to attack both bats, but often you'll need to find a way to avoid the swarm when going from one side to the next. These are probably the most challenging levels in the game. And then there's also Temple Ruins, which will be difficult if you're impatient with these spinning platforms, but aren't so challenging to deal with, I don't think. This island has 2 bosses, Ripper Roo and Koala Kong. Kong is really easy, you just avoid his attacks and spin the big rock back at him when he throws it. But then Ripper Roo is also easy, but I feel like I win thanks to luck more than timing. You just need to jump on these TNT crates and hope they blow up when he bounces next to them. My biggest takeaway with Island 2 is that I was really getting into the atmosphere of this game. For fear of looking like typical kids game over-analysis, I'll explain what I mean. The game has pretty simple graphics by today's standards, but the developers did a really good job in the art department conveying scale and scope. Like in The Road to Nowhere, the all-white pit just makes me feel like I'm really high in the sky in a perilous set piece. The pitch black of Temple Ruins makes me feel like I'm deep in a cavern, and when I reach the top of the gate levels and I can see the other islands in the distance, I feel like I'm super high up since I've been climbing from the ground straight to this point. I think the music and how it sounds in the PS1 console was another part of selling the atmosphere. Josh Mansell was the primary composer of all the Naughty Dog games from Crash 1 to Jak 3, and he cooked with all the Crash soundtracks. The game is littered with catchy tunes, but each track in Crash 1 has kind of a tranquil feeling to it, so the melodies will be catchy on their own, but not so loud or bombastic as to feel out of place in this trek through the jungle. I think the art of this game is fantastic in general, both from a technical perspective and from a pure artistic one. But to cover one point at a time, Andy Gavin really was a technical genius from an early age. The game wasn't all designed by him, but for the early Naughty Dog games, he was steering that ship, and Crash did a lot of really smart things with the technology. The levels are so detailed, visually speaking, for the standards of its time, while keeping the loading times relatively brief. That was because of how they decided to load in data. You can't control the camera in Crash at all, and that was because everything that is behind Crash is deloaded from the game when it's not in view. And the closer you get to the other side of the map, the more of it loads in. So while it is a simple game, under the hood it's doing a lot to present the final product to the player. Crash as a character works super well. Naughty Dog hired cartoonists Joe Pearson and Charles Zimbalist to help them create the character. These two were prominent character designers in the animation business at the time. Charles Zimbalist ended up being the art director for Crash 1, 2, and 3. The vision was to take a somewhat obscure animal from the jungle and make them the mascot of the game. The original placeholder name was Willy the Wombat, but they never intended to use that, even though names in that league were the ones Universal really liked. The final animal was a Bandicoot, and his name was simply because what he does in the game is break boxes. So, Crash Bandicoot. Simple, effective, and catchy, much like Sonic the Hedgehog. In-game, they give Crash as much personality as they could. His animations showing his skittish and also daring side as often as they can. Showing his face at every turn they could, since for most of the game you're seeing his backside. Which is textured to have shading so you wouldn't just be looking at a plank of orange for the entire game. Crash's character design, especially in the early drafts, has a very clear Warner Bros. Tasmanian Devil influence. The giant teeth and big eyes and spinning maneuver conveyed that clearly. When you start with inspiration as clear as that, it becomes simpler to design a world around him. It's a zany, cartoony, and Looney Tunes-esque world, so you fill it with crazy characters like Ripper Roo or Dr. Neo Cortex. But since the designs are simple, it makes them easy to translate to foreign audiences to maximize the success. The Japanese version of Crash, for example, subtly changed the character design to de-emphasize the teeth and gave him the Pac-Man eyes. The Japanese marketing team at Sony didn't really like the design originally, and with these quick changes they were much more on board. The game having such a simple story made it easy to market in different ways. The Japanese version of Crash was a cute and marketable mascot, while the American marketing team played into the tropes of the 90s game market and went on the offensive. The 90s were well known for the rivalry between Sega and Nintendo, so Sony of America had Crash join the fray.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
Pack up your stuff. I got a little surprise for you here.
Check it out. What do you think about that? We got real-time, 3D, lush organic environments. How's that make you feel, buddy?
Feel a little like your days are numbered?
I'm gonna have to ask you to leave.
You're hurting my elbow.
Is that Italian?
No, Bandicoot, it's an Australian name.
What is apparent about all of this is how Crash Bandicoot does absolutely nothing that reinvents the wheel. And that's what I've been saying about the game for the entire time. The level design is like 2D platformers with a 3D camera, the character is following the mold of Sonic the Hedgehog, and the marketing is trying more or less the same thing. That's the thing about Naughty Dog as a studio that I find really interesting. Something that's been a part of their company since Way of the Warrior, that their goal is usually to find things that work and do their own technologically impressive and proficient take on it. Like the Uncharted games being a Technicolor serial-style adventure game out of the contemporary third-person shooter gameplay, or how The Last of Us' resource management intention would remind anyone of Resident Evil 4, and how the Jak series was a giant snowball of popular early 2000s gaming tropes. This being their approach was cemented in the Crash Bandicoot era. I haven't mentioned it thus far because I've been comparing Crash to Mario and Sonic, but the game that Crash is the most like is Donkey Kong Country, the landmark title for the Super Nintendo that came out just a couple of years prior to Crash. The two games are pretty similar in terms of level themes, level gimmicks, atmosphere, collectibles, challenges, and impressive graphical prowess. Jason and Andy themselves have said that above all other games, Crash was more or less trying to be a 3D take on Donkey Kong Country, and you can feel that influence throughout the entire game. And I don't find that to be a bad thing. I think talented artists, animators, and programmers taking what was already working and trying and make something new out of it and consistently succeeding is what makes them and their games some of my favorites. I was saying challenge is part of this game's legacy, and the final island, Cortex Island, is where the game throws its toughest obstacles at you. Most of the levels on Island 3 are brand new level types, like Cortex Power, an industrial plant, or Heavy Machinery, a 2D factory level, Generator Room, a giant pitch-black platforming area, Lights Out, an actually pitch-black castle level where you need your Witch Doctor mask to see anything at all, Toxic Waste, a linear level where barrels are getting thrown at you, and Slippery Climb, where you ascend the side of the castle while dealing with perilous platforming sequences. Again, if you get used to the game's rhythm, it isn't so difficult to deal with, and then you battle bosses against Pinstripe and Embryo. The former is a super easy one. You hide behind cover while he shoots, and when he runs or reloads, you hit him. And then Embryo is even simpler. Just jump on these chemical concoction things, and then that damages him. And when he goes full Hulk, just jump from the debris and hit him in the head. Easy as pie. But I buried the actual most difficult content of the game when describing the content earlier. You see, Crash 1 is a pretty simple game to play and beat if you aren't looking for full completion. Doing so makes the game far more difficult, especially by Island 3. By completing a stage without dying, you're told how many boxes you broke during the stage. If you broke them all, you get a perfect grade and get a gem. Most of the gems are white, but a few of them have different colors. The color gems unlock hidden routes in earlier levels which hide secret boxes you couldn't get to before. Once more, the task is simple, but doing it requires perfection. In order to get every box in a stage, you have to account for certain quirks about the game, like how TNT crates only blow up the surrounding crates if they're on screen, which really only matters in this one early level but is worth mentioning anyway. More importantly, in Crash 1 you only get the gem if you break every box and don't die once. The run has to be completely perfect. If you die and go to a checkpoint, all the boxes in the stage reset. So if you want to get that gem, you need to reset the level and try again. Most of the levels are really short, and as I said, the platforming is never asking anything outrageous of players, so it's the kind of side quest you can beat if you bang your head against it long enough. But I found some moments just annoying. Like sometimes there'd be secret exclamation mark boxes hidden out of view. These load boxes later in the level, and sometimes you just die to honest mistakes and need to do the whole level again, which can be really irksome. And in general, I thought it was really lame to play a stage, try to be perfect, and then find a color gem route right at the end, meaning I was going to need to come back later once I had that gem. So I instead pulled up the Crash wiki and looked at what stages weren't completable when I got to them so I could take it easier when I ran through them the first time. I also thought it was really pace-breaking to have to go back and replay entire Island 1 levels for a few boxes when I'm already on Island 3. Most of the color gems are on Island 3 and you need to go back to the beginning of the game for levels you already mastered just to play again for a gem. One saving grace is that the boxes inside bonus rooms don't count for level completion. In select levels, you collect 3 Tawna, Brio, or Cortex tokens, and these take you to a bonus area. Tawna ones are the easiest and net you many extra lives. Wait, wasn't she captured? Brio stages are more difficult, but also good for getting extra lives, and then Cortex stages are required for full completion because the two of them give you keys that you need to unlock a level on the third island, which will be required if you want to get all the gems in the game. Bonus rooms are also how you save the game. That could be considered irritating as well, needing to pass a bonus room in order to save the game or get a password, but I found the game short enough that it didn't really matter much to me over the years of playing it. But back to getting the gems. I know there are many Crash Bandicoot fans for whom 100%ing the game is the experience. That was never really the case for me. I just like playing a platformer with simple controls and tightly designed levels, so I'm glad I 100%ed the game for the video, but I'll probably never do it again because I don't think perfecting every level is nearly as fun as just playing the game normally. You don't even get anything for it that's worthwhile. The second to last level, the Great Hall, is not a level. If you didn't get the gems, you just jump over the pit and the level's over and you move on to the final boss. If you did get all the gems, what happens is that you use them to get an alternate path to Tana and rescue her without having to fight Cortex at all. Like, what kind of reward is that? Just skip the final boss. If you've made it this far at all, you've certainly mastered the mechanics enough to effortlessly beat this fight. So what kind of ending is this? Only through the skipped ending do you get these "Where Are They Now" screens for the various boss characters, but the canon version of Crash 1 is the one where you beat the final boss, so I don't even see the point of 100%ing the game besides novelty. The final boss is just dodging energy blasts until he fires a green one and you deflect it back at him. Do that a few times and the game is over. In this ending, you still rescue Tana and the day is saved, ending Crash Bandicoot. No game in this series is anywhere near my favorite game or anything, but I still really like Crash 1. I've been playing this game for 20 years now and I've always enjoyed its simple gameplay loop. Maybe once or twice a year I'll be like, I'm feeling like a Crash revisit is in order and play the original game. I think the second and third games are better, but there is an undeniably charming simplicity to the original that makes me enjoy coming back to it. And now, as an adult fan of Naughty Dog, it's really great to revisit the game that really put them on the map. All the years of work Andy and Jason put in through the 80s and early 90s was leading to this moment, this breakout hit game that led to sequels, that led to other iconic IP that the studio would go on to make. IPs that would end up becoming big budget movies and award-winning television. All of that got its start with one simple and iconic game, Crash Bandicoot for the PlayStation, and as I'm sure you can imagine, this story ends with the game getting the reception it deserved. While not as revolutionary as Super Mario 64, Crash Bandicoot reviewed very well. The back of the box even included a quote saying it was a must-play by a die-hard game fan. Now, in my original video on Crash, I said that quote was funny, like they sampled some guy on the street claiming to be a hardcore gamer, but the comments let me know that Die Hard Game Fan was actually a publication. The more you know. The game went on to be one of the highest-selling games on the PS1. The console had many iconic games throughout its life, so I believe it would still be a success if Crash never existed, but the PlayStation as we know it today owes a lot to this game, the original PlayStation mascot. A game from an up-and-coming and relatively unproven studio making a game that defined an entire console generation and stood head-to-head with the face of gaming itself. One that launched a studio that started as two kids goofing off at school into superstardom. That's what makes Crash 1 a compelling game to me as an adult, more than anything else. And next time, we'll discuss what they did with this newfound success by diving into Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back, my favorite game in the Crash series. So until that time comes, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. And Sly Cooper. I realize I haven't mentioned him thus far in the video, so here I'm doing it at the end.